Be mid-morning, the fog had lifted just enough to expose consequences. 2 blackened scars marked the wheat flats beyond the ridge, smoke rising in thin columns that bent east with the wind. Debris lay scattered over a wide, radius-twisted aluminum, fragments of fabric, an engine cowling half buried in frozen soil. Recovery teams moved slowly, methodically, each man assigned a narrow task and nothing more. No one spoke about what had happened. They spoke about procedure. In the operations tent, maps were unrolled and weighted at the corners with ammunition crates. An officer traced flight paths with a pencil dulled from overuse, drawing arcs and corrections that arrived too late to matter. Radios crackled with delayed confirmations. Timestamps were checked, logged, rechecked. The phrase enemy reconnaissance circulated quickly, clean, impersonal. It solved the problem without touching the people inside it. Corporal Anton Weiss stood outside the tent with his helmet tucked under his arm, frost melting into the canvas beneath his boots. He listened to voices rise and fall, inside questions asked twice, answers repeated with slight variations. He recognized the sound of systems correcting themselves. He did not enter. When he was finally called in, it was without urgency. The officer behind the folding table did not look up at first. He flipped through a thin folder, pages already creased, as if they had been handled too often for something so new. Time of initial engagement, the officer asked. Weiss answered without hesitation. The officer nodded and wrote it down. Number of rounds fired. Weiss paused. Not long. Just enough to be precise. 4. The officer's pencil stopped. Your gun fired 4 rounds. Yes, sir. A glance passed between 2 men seated nearby. 4 rounds was unusually low. Efficient, but inconvenient. Systems preferred averages. Authorization? The officer asked. Weiss kept his voice level. Visual confirmation. The officer finally looked up, and command order. There it was. Weiss met his eyes. The aircraft displayed hostile markings. Silence followed. Not disagreement calculation. The officer closed the folder gently, as if afraid to crease something important. Your squad leader did not give the order to fire. No, sir. But the engagement was effective. Yes, sir. The officer leaned back slightly. His chair creaked. You understand why this complicates the report? Weiss nodded once. Orders were the skeleton. Action was muscle. Muscle that moved without skeleton caused panic. You'll wait outside, the officer said. We'll finalize the language. Language mattered. Outside, the airfield was already returning to motion. Transport aircraft taxied slowly, engines coughing awake. Ground crews moved between them like ants, small against the bulk of metal and fuel. The war resumed its rhythm without acknowledging interruption. Weiss returned to the gun line. His Bofors stood as he had left it locked, silent, faint streaks of residue still visible along the barrel where frost had melted unevenly. He took out his cloth and wiped the housing carefully, folding the fabric along the same lines as before. The residue was heavier near the muzzle again. That evening, the citation was announced. Battery. Bravo displayed exceptional discipline and adherence to engagement protocol under limited visibility conditions. Applause followed. Not loud, respectful. Names were not read. Weiss stood at the back, helmet tucked under his arm again, listening to the words slide past him. Systems rewarded outcomes, not deviations. Even successful ones. Later, in the barracks. The others talked freely. Did you see how fast he broke? Recon birds, no doubt. Damn near slipped through. Someone slapped Weiss lightly on the shoulder. Good shooting today. Gage. The nickname stuck the way Grease didn't want it, but persistent. Weiss nodded and said nothing. That night, sleep came in fragments. He dreamed of turbines not spinning, but stalling. Teeth grinding against teeth. Friction building where motion should have been smooth. He woke before dawn with his hands curled, fingers flexing as if still gripping the elevation wheel. At first light, he was back at the gun. Routine did not change. That was its strength. He checked oil levels, tested resistance, listened to the way metal responded to touch. The others focused on range tables and sight alignment. Weiss focused on feel. He had learned long ago that manuals described systems in ideal conditions. Reality lived in tolerances. Midday brought another inspection. This one included an unfamiliar officer, his uniform pressed, boots still clean. He moved down the line with measured interest, asking polite questions that carried weight. When he reached Weiss's gun, he paused. "You were on this piece during the engagement?" he said. "Yes, sir." The officer ran a gloved hand along the housing, then withdrew it quickly, as if reminded of the cold. "Everything operating within spec?" "Yes, sir." He nodded. "Good machine." Weiss corrected him automatically. "Good alignment." The officer smiled thinly, unsure whether to take offense. "Alignment follows design," he replied. "Design assumes conditions," Weiss said. The officer studied him for a moment longer. 10 Mobidon. That evening, a revised order circulated. Hold fire until visual confirmation and command authorization, no exceptions. The words were underlined. Weiss read them twice, then folded the paper and placed it inside his jacket pocket. He understood what it meant. Systems corrected by narrowing tolerance, not expanding it. That night, the hum returned. Later this time, higher altitude, cleaner rhythm. Friendly aircraft passed overhead, their silhouettes unmistakable, engines synchronized in a way that spoke of training and fuel abundance. Weiss tracked them without tension, letting the sound wash over him and pass. But something had changed. He found himself mapping intervals again, feeling for irregularities that were not there. Anticipation lingered, unresolved. A system once bent, never fully straightened. 3 days later, confirmation arrived through channels Weiss never saw. The aircraft shot down had been German reconnaissance, using captured Allied transponder patterns. Their route had been calculated to exploit hesitation. Fog. Protocol. Delay. The battery received formal commendation. No amendments were made to individual records. In the debrief tent, the same officer from before summarized the conclusion. The system functioned exactly as designed. He closed the folder without lifting his eyes. Weiss understood then what troubled him most. The system had survived not because it worked, but because it could absorb error without acknowledging it. That night, he cleaned the gun longer than necessary. He wiped frost from the barrel even though there was none. He checked alignment that hadn't shifted. Repetition calmed him. Precision created a space where thought could not intrude. Discipline became shelter. The others talked about promotions, about rotations, about when the war might end. Weiss listened and said nothing. Machines did not speculate. They waited, and somewhere beyond the fog, systems on the other side were learning too.